get started in a few minutes. All right. Good evening. I'm Annie Regan, Campaigns Director at Penn Future. Penn Future is an environmental nonprofit in Pennsylvania, partnering with conservation voters of PA to shape environmental policy at all government levels. Our goal is to ensure everyone has a stable climate, clean air, pure water, and a responsive democracy. Before we start, I want to thank our co-sponsors for our event tonight, including League of Conservation Voters, the Pennsylvania Solar Center, Solar United Neighbors, Clean Air Council, Physicians for Social Responsibility of Pennsylvania, the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, Reimagine Appalachia, and the Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. We'll make sure to include information about these organizations in our follow-up email. Next slide, please. I also want to go through a few nuts and bolts for our webinar tonight. If you would like to enable closed captioning, please look to the bottom of your screen. You will see the word captions. You can click that and then click the option to enable closed captioning. You may need to find the three little dots and click those to see the option for the closed captioning. After the event, we'll send an email to everyone with a recording of the presentation, as well as links and resources shared in the chat. We will hold questions until the end, but feel free to add questions in the Q&A section as we go along. The chat is available if a speaker mentions a term or concept that needs extra clarification. Our goal for this webinar is for folks to have a better understanding of this issue, so please chime in if something does not make sense. As we're getting started, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know your name, where you're joining us from, the name of the organization you work with, if that applies to you. All right. So let's get started. As you may have seen from the promotion of this event, only 5% of Pennsylvania's energy comes from clean and renewable energy. Meanwhile, renewable energy sources like solar and wind are often the fastest and cheapest options for new energy generation, especially compared to fossil fuels. With rising electricity costs, Pennsylvanians need access to reliable and affordable energy sources now more than ever. However, as you may have read or seen in the news, recent federal actions such as the rollback of clean energy incentives threaten to slow the growth of Pennsylvania's solar industry by making it harder and more expensive for residents to go solar. Tonight, we'll hear from experts on the latest on what's happening in Washington, D.C., how it's impacting the renewable industry in Pennsylvania, and pathways forward to a clean energy future in the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. All right, our expert panel includes Annie Shapiro, State Engagement Director at League of Conservation Voters, Sharon Pillar, Founder and Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Solar Center, and Adam Nagel, Director of Government Affairs at Penn Future. Director of Civic Engagement for Penn Future and CVPA, Jess Catterat, is lending technical support tonight, so please feel free to note if you have issues in the chat or Q&A section, and Jess will provide Zoom assistance. Now, to kick us off, we'll be hearing from Annie Shapiro, State Engagement Director at League of Conservation Voters, who's going to tell us what is happening in DC.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you all, and I'm so happy to be joining you on this webinar. I'm Annie Shapiro. I'm the State Engagement Director, as Annie said, of the League of Conservation Voters, which basically just means that I get to work with folks across the country on federal advocacy, which is very exciting. Next slide, please. We can just move to the next one. So, I'm going to be giving a little bit of an overview on where we are in the federal landscape, what has happened around solar in Washington over the past, honestly, mainly focused on the last 2 months. And I'm really going to be focusing on solar. There will be in the chat at some point in the near future a memo that LCV wrote about all of the 69 anti-environmental provisions within the reconciliation package. So those will go into more detail about other pieces because the reconciliation package overall was incredibly harmful to our climate, to our clean air, to our water. But I'm really going to focus on some of the solar provisions instead. So without further ado, I'm going to start with some of the pieces that are really critical in the reconciliation package around solar developers and the installation and creation of solar. First, just so folks know, reconciliation is a very confusing name. It means a lot of things. It also doesn't always clearly state what it is. The reconciliation package was the package passed by Congress and signed by the president on July 4th that the president calls the Big Beautiful Bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill. Um, we call it at LCB the Big Ugly Bill. You sometimes will hear it just called reconciliation or the Republican reconciliation budget, a variety of names. They're all talking about the same thing. And reconciliation is just a way for Congress to basically do additional budget processes outside of their general budget process. So it can seem super confusing, but what you just need to know is it's kind of a secondary or additional budget process that they did. So this bill was passed almost 2 months ago, and it did a variety of things, as I mentioned, around anti-environmental, anti-climate, anti-clean energy provisions. Some of the critical pieces around solar development are these changes to the tax credits. We will get into in the next slide some of the changes to tax credits for for homeowners, for residents, for renters, so for individuals. These are more for corporations, for big developers, for utilities. So just as a note, we will get there in 1 second. We're starting kind of on the larger scale, and we'll get to the residential and individual piece in just a minute. You don't need to know any of these acronyms. They are not super important, but I wanted to put them up there in case folks wanted some of the details. Happy to talk through them in more detail. But basically what the reconciliation package did is it called out in particular solar and wind development and creation and said that the tax credits that allowed for companies and utilities to install and make those both solar and wind will end now in July 2026, so a year after the bill was signed by the president, instead of an additional basically 5 years, even more than that, 6 years. So it really cut the tax credits off earlier, and it also made it much harder for companies to meet the requirements of the tax credits because it put a variety of different and more stringent rules upon them, like FEOC, which is Foreign Entity of Concern. We don't need to get into the details of it, but it's basically a piece that makes it much harder for developers to access the materials that they need. Since the bill passed, which already really cut into our ability to manufacture and to install solar, there was an executive order put out by President Trump less than a week after the bill passed that made it even harder and more complicated for these developers to develop. Basically, what it means in short is that it used to be very easy for developers to know if they met the requirements laid out by the federal government. And now it's much more complicated. It's all about finances and safe harbor laws, and it's very in depth and in detail. But the main thing to know is it's just more complicated now, which is going to make it more complicated to know for developers if they have met the requirements. Abbreviations, great question. ITC is investment tax credit, PTC is production tax credit. Those are just the two tax credits that are mainly used by developers. So sorry for the confusion. It's very weedy and wonky. Other impacts on solar is that we'll get into this a little bit more in 1 second, but it repealed Section 134 of the Clean Air Act, which is what authorized the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which also had underneath its umbrella Solar for All. We'll get into Solar for All in 1 second. It also increases fees for solar and wind projects on public lands, federal public lands, but fossil fuel development on federal public lands did not have the same increase in fees. Next slide. Okay, so residential tax credits. There were and still are a variety of tax credits that are available for individuals, for uh, renters, for homeowners in order to access uh, things that help electrify your home, right? So EVs, heat pumps, weatherization, they're all listed here. I have the link in the slides and I'm happy to put it in the chat in a second for this specific chart. But these all have changed to be expiring much sooner than they were originally supposed to expire. So as you can see, they all expire other than the EV charger by the end of 2025, which is in like 3 months, I think, 4 months. It's August. The EV charger ones expires in the middle of 2026. So I just really wanted to highlight that for folks who want to electrify your own house, whether that be rooftop solar or battery installation, these tax credits are expiring very, very quickly. And so if you want to use them, you basically have to have full installations by the dates listed here. Next slide. Okay, solar for all. Like we're gonna talk about what I just said about the Clean Air Act and the repeal of the greenhouse gas reduction funds and why that matters. Solar for all was a provision within the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the bill that passed all of these laws that are now being repealed and terminated and expired in reconciliation, that provided a variety of rooftop solar options, battery options, community solar options for communities with low income and low wealth. So for those communities and those households and families that don't have access to capital to install their own rooftop solar, even with those tax credits that we just saw on the page before, which of course now are expiring, but this program gave funds across the country to states and nonprofits and organizations to help ensure that folks with the lowest incomes across our country could also benefit from the affordability and the lowering of utility bills and also the positive impact on climate that comes from having rooftop solar. Solar for all, we thought was safe, truthfully. And then about 3 weeks ago, on August 7th, Solar for All grantees across the country received termination letters from the federal government. And now all of the money is getting clawed back, which means the government is taking it back from the states and from the grantees and pulling it back into the federal government, which is really bad because we thought this program was safe, and also because now folks with the lowest incomes across the country won't be able to access this really critical program of Solar for All, and of equitable access to solar, which is obviously really important in terms of thinking about utility bills, and making sure that our climate and clean energy goals are equitable and inclusive of particularly those with the lowest wealth, communities of color. We will talk more kind of about how this impacts state policy in Pennsylvania. That will not be me. I'm not a Pennsylvanian. I am not an expert in Pennsylvania policy. So that will be coming in a little while, and I'm happy to talk more about the suing piece in a little while once we kind of go through what this means for you all and what it looks like there. Great question about the tax credit expiring on 12/31/25 or 7/26. Any tax credit that is for me as an individual, right? Like a resident, a homeowner, buying a heat pump, those basically all expire 12/31/2025. So the confusing thing is that there's this distinction between tax credits that are for like corporations and utility companies to build large scale solar and also to develop solar, right? So to like actually develop the panels and then to install them at a much broader scale. Those ones expire on July of 2026. The ones that I can use to install rooftop solar on my own home expire 12/31/2025. So the ones for individuals and for residents and homeowners are expiring sooner. I hope that clarified. Happy to talk more about it as well. I think that is everything for me. If folks have more questions, I'm happy to keep answering them in the chat. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Sharon, who's going to dive into more Pennsylvania specifics.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie and Penn Future and League of Conservation Voters for this opportunity to talk to you all. And thank you all for being here. It's a great showing of interest in all this. So can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So just a little about the Pennsylvania Solar Center. If you don't know about us, we've been around for almost 8 years now. Our vision is that we envision a world powered by energy that's reliable, affordable, and sustainable for all. And we provide trusted guidance to usher all Pennsylvanians into the clean energy economy to reach a sustainable and resilient tomorrow. And you can find us on that website, pasolarcenter.org. Next slide. And the way we work is we say we work to transform, educate, and advocate. So our transform bucket is our technical assistance into the commercial sector. So almost any entity that's not a single family home, we have a team of people who can help all the way through the assessment and feasibility phase, helping projects identify funding, help them run an RFP or bid project to get a solar developer, and then celebrate it at the end. So that's our most robust program. And then we also work on advocacy, mostly on the state level and other kinds of education as well. Next slide. And our GOT Solar, we call it, our Get Solar program is our technical assistance program that I was talking about. So we are close. I mean, we have 20 completed projects that we've helped facilitate, and we have another probably twice as many of that we're hoping to see finish maybe by the end of this year. So if you have a part of a faith community or a nonprofit, a business, you can come into the program and we'll help you. The next slide. I did want to mention this program we have is the Pennsylvania Solar Corps. It's a volunteer mapping project where we've mapped 77 communities. Volunteers, just like everyone here, can show up once a month for 2 hours. We'll train you how to use something called PV Watts, and you'll be assigned like a section of a community and map as many projects as you can. Last night we did food banks around the state, but we're usually doing that focused on different entities. So welcome to join us and help us do that. We'd really love your assistance. Next slide. And I did want to mention too, I think there's a lot of people here from Southeast Pennsylvania that solarize Greater Philly, which is spearheaded by the Philadelphia Energy Authority. We're helping them on the commercial side, and I will send that link to them. But they do have a residential part of this too, and we also have a similar program in southwestern Pennsylvania too. Next slide. So what you really want to hear, what are the impacts of HR1 to Pennsylvania? So next slide. I think the thing that we're most concerned about, or a lot of people are most concerned about, is what this is going to do to energy prices. And so there is a study out by the Clean Energy Buyers Association that came out showing if the bill passed, which it did, that we would see a huge increase in prices across the country. And some of that's different in different states. But in Pennsylvania, the estimate is that Pennsylvania average household energy costs would go up by nearly $60 per year by 2030 and $80 by 2035. And that is cumulative household energy cost by nearly $2 billion and will cost over 26,000 Pennsylvania jobs by 2030. And then, of course, there's the environmental impacts of that because we'll be reducing the potential and the number of clean energy projects that were supposed to come on. And that will increase Pennsylvania's air pollution to the equivalent of about 1 to 3 coal-fired plants equivalent of that. So it's major impacts, of course, in slowing renewable energy, which I'm sure most people on this call are not shocked or surprised to hear that. But economically, it is a very short-sighted policy, and the impacts are going to be grave for many, many people. So we can go to the next slide. And I think really what I want to talk about is we hear that's going to happen, but why is that going to happen? And I think that's sort of there's a lot of different factors. And we've seen even before the bill passing this increase in energy prices over the last few years, particularly during COVID, after COVID. But we're seeing, and here are some of the reasons for that. HR1, of course, makes them all worse because we're slowing the deployment of renewable energy. So these first two I'll talk a little bit more about, but one of the major issues is resource adequacy, is what we say. So, are there enough electric generation systems to produce enough energy for all of our needs and the demand? And our demand, which used to be fairly, flat, has increased a lot recently with additional AI, more data centers, and electrification. So the concern is that, and we've also lost a number of larger power plants like coal plants, and really slowing down the ability to get renewable energy on the grid. The other part that's really important, I'll talk a little bit more, is peak demand. So peak demand is the highest or usually the hottest hours of the year, and sometimes this happens in winter where there's a lot of electricity use on very cold days. But that energy at peak demand is very expensive. And as we have hotter days, more hotter days, we have an increase in the amount of energy that we need at those peak demand times. And that's actually where renewables, in particular solar and storage, play a really important role. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Other reasons for energy pricing is increasing natural gas exports. There are lots of countries that are trying to get off Russian gas, and they're increasing liquefied natural gas. There's a big push in this country to export that. So the more natural gas we're exporting, that lowers the supply and increases the demand and increases that price of natural gas. And we'll see in a minute why that impacts our energy prices so much. Of course, we are having more and more severe weather events, more hot days, and these weather events are destroying a lot of our infrastructure when you see wires down. And so that's very expensive infrastructure to fix when these weather events are happening, and also increases the cost of our energy. And then one of the other things we're seeing is a very slow approval process, different levels around getting particularly large scale renewables to come onto the grid. And I'll mention that a little bit. But also locally, getting smaller projects, there's just a slowing down of some of these approvals. So I'll go into a couple more of these things in the next slide. I wanted to parse this out. Probably a lot of you know this, but when we're talking about the grid and who's regulating it, these are really important things to understand and parse. So traditional energy, big coal-fired plants, gas plants, and also big utility solar and wind projects, they're coming online through the transmission lines. Those are high voltage lines. And those are regulated by PJM, which I'll talk about in a minute, and FERC at the federal level. So PJM is regional. It's their 13 states and Pennsylvania and D.C. And they're our grid manager. So they're overseeing what's coming on, giving approvals to those large generators to come online. And then more locally, we have the distribution grid. So those are the wires that are coming into our homes and our buildings, lower voltage, those are regulated by the, in Pennsylvania, the Public Utility Commission and the distribution companies. So the different solar markets interact with these different regulatory agencies, and some of the things that are going on or not going on that we want to happen are because of these different levels. So next slide. I just wanted to point out, as I was talking about natural gas, we are very over dependent on natural gas for electricity production, where a large portion of our electricity comes from natural gas. That's been growing over many years. You can see coal-fired, which was the dominant electricity source many, many years ago. We still have a pretty strong nuclear energy fleet. We do have big hydro plants. We won't see any new plant of those. And then renewables in Pennsylvania, I think Annie mentioned it's around 5. We just got to about 2 gigawatts, which is about 2% of our energy from solar just recently. So it's a small amount, but small amounts of renewables can make a huge difference. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So go to the next slide. But as you can see on, don't go back, but on the natural gas side, why that fluctuating volatile pricing on natural gas impacts our electricity pricing because it's such a large portion of it. Um, this graph shows you in the brown and dark brown natural gas, coal, and you can see over the years, this is across the US, this is new energy, electricity that's coming online, new energy sources that have been added. And you can see in the last few years, it's primarily solar, wind, and battery storage. A little bit of natural gas, but that's that is the way of the world. That's what investors are investing in and have been investing in. And if you go to the next slide, and I can see, and what I want to show in this slide is, so mention PJM. Remember, that's the transmission. That's the big power producers. They have something called a queue. So those big energy producers want to come online. They have to get approval from PJM, our grid manager. And if you look at what's in that queue, and those are the resources that are saying, hey, we want to connect, we want to build and come onto the queue, probably in the next 5 years. And you can see most of that, again, is still solar, and solar's in red, and wind is the darker green, and storage is huge, in lighter green. There are very few other sources, natural gas, just a few. And a hybrid is a solar plus storage, so that's even more. Really, there's not a lot else asking to come on. So we're gonna, on HR1, pulling down the amount of resources that will get built, that impacts the ability to put new generation on at a time that we drastically need new energy to meet our demands. So this is a major problem that we're going to be facing. And then the next slide. Here you can see this is the solar growth over the last 25 years. And you can see in the last just very short amount of time, the majority of solar has come on, and is predicted to continue that. Now, this was before HR1 was passed. And you can see the different markets, and I just want to just the dark blue is the residential market. Those companies, as you saw from what Annie showed you, those tax credits end at the end of this year for residential solar. That's a major issue for companies that focus on residential solar. So we're pretty concerned about them. We'll still be able to do leasing for residential. Those companies that do solar leasing, they would be able to, they will claim the commercial tax credits will last a little bit longer. So we expect the residential market to move more towards leasing. But as electricity prices increase, it's still going to make more and more sense. Even without the tax credits, it'll almost replace the benefit that you're getting financially. The commercial sector is that lighter or the medium blue there. That again is basically everything is not residential. and that is powering buildings. So that sector has a little longer tooth as far as the tax credits. And so we'll see there's a mad rush to get these projects in and built. Most of them will have to be built by the end of 2027, in service by then. And then community solar, which we don't have in Pennsylvania, but that market is growing. And then utility scale, of course, is the biggest sector of the solar department or markets. So what I'm reading, and we just don't know the impacts to some of these markets, but there are some forecasts out there that a third or more of projects that are in development are being canceled. So again, quite concerning. That graph of that prediction and forecast will look very different when we have this conversation next year, unfortunately. Next slide. But I really wanted to take, I mentioned peak demand. And while renewables are a very small percent in Pennsylvania, they play a really major role in pulling down peak demand because solar is working the best at its most efficient during the middle of the day. So it'll start working, you'll see if you have solar, 8 o'clock-ish, and in the summer, it starts tapering off in the later afternoon. And so, but that's a lot of that, most of our energy demand is in that later afternoon. So this is a great example of what we could be doing or where we could be going in Pennsylvania. And this is just one day in New England, June 24th. We've had a lot of these days this year of behind the meter solar. And behind the meter, that means like rooftop, it's powering the buildings, whether it's residential or commercial. They That made up as much as 22% of the power being used in New England and in their grid. They're not part of our grid at any given time during that day, according to Acadia Center. At 3:40, the total peak demand, 28.5 gigawatts. Solar was meeting 4.4 gigawatts. That's really quite incredible. And then because of that, the prediction is that because wholesale power prices went above $1,000, so when those peak demand, that's very expensive energy. And it costs a lot to do that. So if you're gouging out or pulling down the amount of energy we need from those expensive resources, it's going to save money. So because New England was able to do this, they were able to really save consumers at least $8.2 million. That's in one day. So you can see the beauty of even just a little bit of solar. There was also a lot of storage in residential solar and even pulling energy from EVs during this time that made this possible. And those are kind of structures that we would like to see in Pennsylvania, where we're really using these alternative opportunities with solar. We don't need baseload solar, baseload power. We hear this a lot. It's not necessary, but getting more distributed solar on, and of course, more utility scale solar. Distributed solar is very fast to deploy. You can put that up in a matter of months, and it needs the distribution approval, which we'd like to improve that process. But it is something that's very important in pulling down electricity prices. Another example is the next slide, which in California, could you move to the next slide? Thank you. This kind of shows how this works. The graph shows you like when, like around, you can see like 6, 7 that starts solar power. You can see that how it's happening there. And then they have a lot of battery systems in California. So as solar starts ramping down, a lot of that stored solar then is going to pull out that peak demand. And so that's really amazing. They found that renewables filled 100% of the state's electricity demand for up to 10 hours on 98 of 116 days last year in California. At their peak, the renewables provided up to 162%. That's more, of course, than they needed, adding extra electricity that they could export to other states. So this is, again, just another example of what we can be doing and how just adding just even a little bit more. I mean, they have a lot more solar than we do. I think they have 16 gigawatts of distributed solar, where we have probably 1 gigawatt. So we're way behind California, but it just shows what we can achieve in advancing this. And then the next slide, we talk about how solar benefits all Pennsylvanians. And that happens in many different ways. And I'm not going to read through all this, but really, utility scale solar does that same thing on the peak demand, so lots of it. So that's suppressing prices for everybody, even if they don't have solar. And that's really such an important part of why we'd like to see more solar in general, but utility scale can do that on larger levels. We would, of course, want community solar, and to see that is here in Pennsylvania, because that locally produced solar is a lot more efficient than even like a utility scale solar that's farther away and has to travel farther to get here. Again, I talked about distributed solar, and then solar and storage is so crucial because of that peak demand piece. And so we're seeing advances in storage. Those tax credits were not touched. So they will continue to receive those federal tax credits that are available to storage. So that's all I have for today. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. And thank you again.
All right, on to
Oh, I'm
this.
passing to Adam. Thank you. Sorry, Adam.
I got you, Sharon. No worries, no worries. Hello, everyone. Again, Adam Nagel, Director of Government Affairs for Penn Future. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about four bills at the state level. I'm glad that I saw so many questions around community solar. I'm glad I decided to make the decision to lead off with community energy. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about House Bill 504 a little bit. So House Bill 504, sponsored by State Representative Schweier, 134th District, Lehigh County, helps to increase access to clean renewable energy by allowing community members to purchase a share of local clean energy. Just to harken back to the definition of community solar, which is the important part of community energy that Sharon showed a little bit earlier with one of her slides. It provides an equitable avenue to accessing clean energy while helping drive down costs of energy and increasing the reliability of our power sources. So House Bill 504 passed the House with a bipartisan majority. I think it was 114 to 89. It is currently assigned to Senate Consumer Protection Committee. It is the second session in a row where the House has passed legislation that would provide the necessary authorization for community solar in Pennsylvania. But so far, we have not seen Senate movement. There is a companion bill in the Senate, which is Senate Bill 504, same number, HB and SB 504. I don't imagine SB 504 would necessarily be the vehicle that moves, though it always could be. Indications are not great for community energy this year, but that could always change. We need folks across the state to be reaching out to their state senators to indicate their support for the legislation and ask the Senate Consumer Protection Committee to put it up for a vote. An additional flag on House Bill 504 and Senate Bill 504 is that both bills are part of Governor Shapiro's lightning plan, which is a package of 6 bills designed to deal with energy challenges here in Pennsylvania. Senate Majority Leader Pittman has stated a few different times that the Senate is not necessarily interested in taking up legislation in the lightning plan until the regional greenhouse gas initiative is taken off the table of potentially being implemented here in Pennsylvania. So that remains a distinct and separate challenge to simply gaining momentum on some of these issues as they move forward. So that's House Bill 504. I encourage everyone here to reach out to their state senators just to voice your support for this important legislation so that we can finally pass community solar legislation in Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. All right, so this is kind of sequential in my
Hi, folks. I think we lost Adam. Let me just let him know. Sorry about that.
While Annie tries to get a hold of Adam, I just want to say for folks that are in the chat, we definitely will be sharing this recording with everybody as well as the slides. I know there's a lot of good information here, and as well as all of the resources that we're dropping in the chat, they will come your way via follow-up email. So thank you all for being so engaged and keep your questions coming.
He's back.
That was really strange. Zoom booted me out. I apologize for that. Little technical difficulty here on my part. So where was I? House Bill 1260. So sequentially, this makes sense. To this relates directly to community solar. All right, audio too. Great. Technical difficulties. I love in person so much more.
I,
We hear you
I can
great.
hear you just fine. I can hear you fine,
Yeah.
Adam.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay. So, House Bill 1260 is sponsored by Representative Josh Siegel, who is also from Lehigh County, same as Representative Schweier with House Bill 504. I don't have much to add here other than what's on the slide. This is a really simple bill. It's a fairly common sense and straightforward path to essentially unlocking all of the square footage that Pennsylvania has that's being taken up by warehouse roofs that do not have solar on them. So what this bill does is it requires that new construction of warehouses essentially allot 40% of their roofs to allow for solar installation. Basically, it just requires that the roofs be load bearing, 40% load bearing, so that way they can handle the weight of solar panels. It does not require that solar panels be installed, just that the roof is built to be load bearing. The second part of the bill is a tax credit for existing warehouse structures to make necessary upgrades. The tax credit is a local version of that. What it does is really it provides authorization to local municipalities to provide a property tax break if they so choose. That is currently assigned to the House Energy Committee, and we are hoping for a committee vote sometime this year. Next slide, please. All right, so this is where we get into more elements of the lightning plan. House Bill 502, which is sponsored by Representative Steele, 33rd District, Allegheny County. So this bill proposes to establish the Reliable Energy Siting and Electric Transition Board, which is a central siting authority to facilitate development of large-scale projects. So this bill generated a lot of discussion, a lot of controversy in the months of May and June within the House of Representatives and the House Energy Committee, and even among the energy and environmental stakeholder spaces across Pennsylvania. The idea of a siting board to handle large-scale energy projects is not new nationally, but it's very new to Pennsylvania. And as someone who worked in the state Senate and has worked with Penn Future at the state level for a number of years now, I can say that I don't believe I've ever seen as much testimony on a given bill that I did on all of the testimony that was submitted in advance of the informational hearings on House Bill 502. So if you've been following along, if you're a subscriber to Penn Future emails, you've known that this one has been the subject of a lot of negotiation and advocacy on our part. So I'm essentially just going to talk about a little bit where things stand. As the slide says, there was a committee vote on this originally scheduled for June 25th. I believe I have that date right. It was ultimately postponed and was not brought up for further consideration at any point on future session days that the House had in June, July, August. We don't know necessarily what the status is moving forward. Where has Penn Future been on House Bill 502? We have always supported the intent behind the legislation, which would streamline the siting of renewable energy projects, particularly solar, through the creation of the board. This legislation aims to stop inconsistent and obstructive local permitting rules that block promising clean energy progress. We know this is happening in municipalities, especially in more rural areas in the central part of the state. It is a huge problem. It is part of the reason why we've created a massive backlog of clean energy projects, especially solar in Pennsylvania. However, given all that from the start, Penn Future has also been clear that this bill must include strong protections for community input. Penn Future drafted amendments to ensure that local voices remain a meaningful part of the approval process. And our support for this legislation, again, as if you've been paying attention, only wavered when there was a proposal to potentially reduce renewable energy goals in Pennsylvania. We view this bill and the next bill I'm going to talk about as a tandem. We view them as a pair. This bill, we need amendments adopted that would improve the legislation as it is currently drafted. And we also need to see some things with the next bill. So next slide, House Bill 501, which is press, which is sponsored by State Representative Danielle Friel-Otten, Chester County, proposes to update Pennsylvania's Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, or AEPS, with the Pennsylvania Reliable Energy Sustainability Standard. What is AEPS? So AEPS was first implemented in 2004. Its goal was to require energy companies to provide a certain percentage of energy that they sell from renewable sources. AEPS was divided into tiers, with Tier 1 having the highest standard of renewable energy. It mandated that Tier 1 resources account for 8% of total requirements. At the time, that seemed really good. We now know, based on experience and what other states have done, both neighboring states and across the country, that the goal was far too modest. And we believe that passing a strong press will allow us to catch up to those states and allow Pennsylvania to have far more ambitious clean energy goals. What does it do? House Bill 501 revises AEPS's standards to incorporate new sources of energy and to rapidly expand the state's energy portfolio. It mandates that 35% of Pennsylvania's energy portfolio come from Tier 1 sources, and that includes solar, wind, geothermal, low-impact hydropower, small modular reactors, fusion energy, and biogas. So 501, where we stand now, there are amendments. It passed out of the House Environment Committee. We are waiting on a floor vote, but let's talk about the amendments because that is what really matters for solar. So next slide, please. So PA Solar Center, Penn Future, conservation voters, other stakeholders, we are advocating for two important solar amendments. One, eliminates the 2-mile restriction for virtual net metering, and two, allows small-scale solar projects to be eligible for Tier 1 and Tier 2 credits. These things create better economics for small-scale solar, and then they reduce some barriers that have been in place for a really long time around solar projects generally. Makes the math better for solar in Pennsylvania and helps Pennsylvania stand up for solar energy at a time when, as we've discussed earlier, the federal government seems to be taking a very big step back. So where we stand on press is that it's similar to 502 with reset. With 501, we are supportive as long as we get these two amendments, and there are some other amendments that have been talked about elsewhere. But we need these two amendments to help provide further support for solar. So our support for press, at least Penn Future, is contingent upon successful adoption of these amendments to the legislation. So we're looking forward to the House of Representatives taking up this critical bill in the fall at some point. That is it for me, or at least should be. And I will pass it back to Annie.
Yep, thank you. And thank you to our wonderful panelists. Before we go into the Q&A portion of our webinar, and I'm seeing that there's already some great questions in the Q&A box, I want to call attention to very important call to actions to ensure Pennsylvania steps in the right direction to become a clean energy leader. So next slide, please. As Adam mentioned, House Bill 501, also known as PRESS, will transition the power we use so that 35% of our electricity comes from clean energy sources by 2035. More clean energy will lower our energy bills, create thousands of good-paying jobs, and improve the health of our family and communities. Pennsylvania state legislators are returning to session in September, and we need your help to pass this very important bill that will make a huge difference for Pennsylvanians in every corner of the state. We made it simple for you to send a message now urging your state rep to stand strong for PA communities by supporting press and investing in Pennsylvania's clean energy future. Believe someone will drop the link in the chat, and also we have a QR code for your convenience. This is just one of the action alerts that you'll be getting from us. If you subscribe to our newsletter, there'll be a series of other ones like solar warehouses that Adam has mentioned. So feel free to take action here, and we'll
Hey,
keep
Annie.
going. Yes.
Annie, a couple people in the chat are saying that your volume is pretty low. If you could try to speak up as we head into the Q&A section, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little bit better, but yeah, for some reason you did get kind of quiet for a moment. So I just wanted to
Sorry
flag
about
for
that.
you. Oh,
Thank
much better.
you. Awesome. Great. And I think someone dropped that in the chat. Perfect. We'll take one more minute there. And then next slide, please. Awesome. And so another call to action is on Monday, September 29th, we're bringing environmental advocates just like you from across the state to Harrisburg to demand action on clean energy, climate resilience, and pollution reduction. You'll get the training, the talking points, and the chance to meet directly with elected officials to make your voice impossible to ignore. For instance, press will be one of the issues we advocate for on this lobby day. If you cannot make it, we have a letter to the editor template available for you to submit to your local newspaper to help spread our advocacy efforts across the state. And we will share that template with you in our follow-up email. And I believe someone is also dropping the link to that as well. And all of this will be in the follow-up email. So just want to make sure that there are time for questions. All right. And before we conclude tonight's program, we are going to transition to the brief Q&A. Thanks to everyone who submitted your questions. Please continue to add questions as we go along. I know we only have a few minutes. If we're not available to answer every question because of the limited time, we will email you directly. And if you don't hear from us, I'll put my email in the chat, regan@pennfuture.org, and we'll make sure to follow up. All right. So let's go to the first question. All right. Several folks, including William, Lynn, Mark, and Mitch, had specific questions about the tax credits and when the ones getting pulled down would expire. So first, since it's been a confusing process, could one of the panelists once again clarify exactly when the clean energy tax credits expire? Annie, I think that would be you if you're still here.
I am here, and I wish it was a super easy answer, but basically, for residential or individual tax credits, they're mainly December 31st of this year, not exclusively, but mostly by the end of this year. And then for kind of the broader scale development and larger installations, they are July of 2026. So I hope that helps. I know it's super confusing and the dates are all over the place, but that is broad strokes and that's for solar and wind. As Sharon mentioned, there are other dates for things like storage.
Okay. And then do we also have a resource where folks can access information about specifics for the clean energy tax credits and EV tax credits and how they might apply to individual situations? If we could drop that in the chat, and we'll make sure to follow up in the email. Okay, great. The next question we have, other folks were wondering what's the best way to start thinking about solar? Should it be an energy audit? Sharon, this one might be for you.
Sorry, Annie. Yeah, if it's for your home, energy audits are always great. It's good to do that. But with solar, you can really just want to be looking at your electric bill is what that's going to be offsetting. So I'm not suggesting you shouldn't do the energy audit. Don't write to me and say that. But that's what you're going to be looking at. That's what the solar developer is. I would suggest that you'd want to get 3 quotes from local established developers. They'll know what to do. They'll be able to, and then compare with the savings that they're telling you that you would be getting and the size of the system and all those kind of things. So if you find a reputable installer, they should be able to help you through that whole process.
Thank you for that. Some folks here wanted some more clarification on the tiers of press and what is net metering. Adam, if you want to handle that question.
I saw a net metering definition in the chat that I cannot build on further, but I will highlight. I thought that was an excellent explanation. Net metering allows households to sell excess electricity produced by solar to the utility at same price the household pays. So, Jennifer, great brief explainer there, given the time allotments we have. Currently, there are 3 tiers within press. Tier 1 is the one we're focusing on. There are some other things in tier 2 and tier 3 that have been part of various conversations in the General Assembly. But tier 1 for us is the big one. That would be 35% by 2035 under the proposed legislation, and that includes solar, wind, geothermal, low impact hydropower, small modular reactors, fusion energy, and biogas. So tier 1's the big one there.
Thank you so much. Another question that I can answer directly is, are there resources to make sure solar is done right in my community? Penn Future actually, and I'll just put this in the chat directly, put out a Pennsylvania solar municipal guidebook. If your municipality wants to go solar and wants to make sure there's some model ordinances and guides to making sure it's done right. I put the link in the chat and we'll make sure to include that in the follow-up email as well. That just was released a few months ago, and it's a pretty great resource. All right. Questions. Looking at the next one. For those who can't go solar, what are some of the best ways to lower their electricity bills given the rising prices? Can any of the panelists answer to that in terms of energy efficiency, if there's resources we can share? We also had 2 prior webinars. Yeah, community solar for sure. We also had 2 prior webinars where we talked about available resources immediately for to lower your bills that we can follow up as well from our last 2 Why is my electricity bill so high webinar. And we also have some energy efficiency, energy audit resources that we can make sure to share that are Pennsylvania specific. So that's a great question. All right. I think we only have about a minute left, and we have a lot of questions that we'll make sure to follow up in an email. So thank you everybody for submitting. We are going to wrap it up, but thank you so much for coming out tonight. And let's see if I have anything else. If you will receive a follow-up email from us and with the access to the recording, the presenters' presentations, links shared in the chat, and call to actions. And thank you for working with us as we work together to create a more equitable and sustainable Commonwealth for all. And have a good long weekend, everybody.